Well, for the next 35 minutes, we're talking about the road to all IP streaming and possibly what the post-broadcast world looks like. And I'm delighted to welcome four very great panelists, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Jason, and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing in the world of streaming, and then also answer our first question, which is how far away are we from being able to stream the World Cup or Olympics and only stream it without broadcasting?
Awesome, thanks, John. Yeah, so Jason Thibault. I'm the Executive Director of the Streaming Video Alliance. We are a global technical association similar to, SMPTE and W3C and IETF and those folks. And we bring member companies across the video ecosystem together to solve critical challenges, technical challenges, in streaming video at scale. So our goal is to help the industry reach the best possible viewer experience, across the broadest range of geographies and at the highest bit rates. And we have lots of working groups across all sorts of topics. In terms of what we've been doing recently, we've been really looking at privacy and protection. So we have a document coming out that is best practices for live stream security. We've also been looking at low latency. So our live streaming working group is putting out a document on best practices for reducing live stream latency. And then of course, our open caching group is continually pushing towards more specifications around open caching, which is a system to allow network operators and content owners and whatnot to really programmatically share information between caches across networks and create one large caching network so a content owner can more easily manage their content across multiple delivery networks. In terms of your question, we got to kind of unpack that. So when you say, streaming the Olympics with no broadcast, the question becomes at sort of, what bit rates, what geographies. It's, there's all sorts of questions there. I don't think we're quite at the point where we could flip a switch and everyone could be streaming the content instead of looking at it through traditional terrestrial broadcast. It's simply a capacity issue. We are getting there, right? Better codecs are coming, so we get better compression. We'll have better quality video for streaming than, we will for broadcast at, larger amounts of geographies and, in the years to come. So we're getting there, but not quite there yet.
Okay, Peter, same again, introduce yourself, tell us a bit about what you do and then answer the question about the Olympics.
So my name is, Peter MACAVOCK. I work for a company called the European Broadcasting Union. We're famous for the Eurovision Song Contest, but we're also famous for providing backhaul and host broadcaster services to the sporting federations of the world. Indeed, that's one of the reasons why many of the sporting federations are based in Switzerland. But in my day job, I chair the DVB project, and I also am heavily involved in the HBB TV organization, both of which are very closely related to the consumer electronics and the broadcasting sector. And what we've seen over the last number of years is a paradigm shift away from pure broadcast into this hybrid world. And if you think of it as the sliding scale between broadcast on one side and complete broadband on the other side, with hybrid being the bit in the middle, it's a question of how long it will take before we get to a pure broadband future. And I think what this last pandemic has showed us is that it may be some time, I think, as Jason has pointed out, before we reach that end game. But it is something where we need to prepare ourselves for the abstraction of the service that we watch from the access network that we use. So in fact, in our vision of the future, the customer doesn't know how he's receiving his content. It's a hybrid access network world. It could be broadcast, it could be broadband. And what we're trying to do in the DVB project in particular is push this world into this hybrid space. So you have a truly ubiquitous service which is delivered over any type of network. And we need to do so in an economic manner. And that's where the playoff between streaming and all its facets and the robustness and the reach of a broadcast network come into play quite nicely together. So when will it happen? Not for quite some time. And I come from this from some knowledge of how it's all done. I would say we're a good 10 years away from it being entirely broadband driven. And I think actually when the dust settles on COVID-19, we may find it's even longer than that. But I would say not before 10 years.
Okay. Okay, Martijn.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Martijn van HORSSEN, and I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of 24i. And what we do is we are almost all OTT. So we are creating and developing applications for any platform in a way that we only have to develop the application once and then deploy it on all those devices. And in the last 2 years, we also started to combine that with services in the streaming itself. So we offer with third parties also the streaming components of that, the CDN, so that we can deliver a full end-to-end solution for having video experiences over the top on a broadband connection. We do that for broadcasters, content owners, and operators. So we also see that operators are having sometimes a strategy to go all broadband, specifically if they don't have a network or don't have over-the-air licenses. So we do see that a lot of the broadcasters are also going to having an OTT solution. And also, of course, what we see already for quite some time, but now with COVID, we see a large uptake in having broadband services as your primary way to watch content. So if I go to your question, I think it really depends on the event. And the World Cup is something that people will watch all together. And there's like a lot of things that people want to watch at the same moment. You don't want to have any delays because you will be the one that will be last notified if you don't have the right streaming or technology around it. So on the World Cup, I think it will take a long time that everyone will do that, and a lot of people watch the same. On the Olympics, there's a little bit of the long tail, and I'm a clear example of that myself. I love judo, and unfortunately, it's not being broadcasted that much on traditional broadcast, but I can watch it through the OTT channels. So I would say it will take only a few years to do that. If you love judo, if you will love all the sports, it will take quite some time. So I think, and I think Jason's remark on geography, there are just still a lot of places in the world that are way better to support with a multicast signal over the air, which is still one of the things that will work. And Peter's remark on HBB TV, we do also quite some work on HBB TV side. For me, it's an enter into the world, or starting with one Olympic channel and then select another channel. So my entry point can be broadband, but I will shift to an OTT stream. And for the user, they don't know what they do. So I think I would say with all the new satellites that Elon sent into space, maybe it will go quite fast. So I'm guessing 8 years. That would be my guess.
Right, okay. So Phil, we've got 10 years and 8 years for all streaming. Is there a BBC view on it? And then introduce yourself first anyway, sorry.
Hi, my name is Phil LAYTON. I lead one of the BBC R&D research teams, and predominantly we look at how the BBC distributes content. So we're called Broadcasting Connected Systems, and that describes how the team of approximately 30 engineers really work about how the BBC distributes its content, both over traditional broadcast platforms, but so much more of our work now is about new IP platforms. We do everything except from the RF layer. That's beyond my capabilities. So we're above the RF layer. But also we look at sustainability. As we're making these transitions into different ways of broadcasting, we obviously want to understand the impact, and part of my team's remit is very much looking at the sustainability issues behind it. Examples of our work, Peter mentioned hybrid platforms. We are behind the creation of the Freeview Play hybrid platform in the UK. That was an important part of our work, and we continue to sort of drive the hybrid experience. We've done all the work around iPlayer and UHD streaming in terms of trying to push the internet to so as far as we can at the moment, we just want to explore the limits of the internet by streaming sort of high quality live events. We've worked on HDR. HLG is one of our inventions. Again, we've used that as part of our iPlayer UHD. In terms of specific IP technologies, we've helped DVB around the standardization of multicast ABR. We've done lots of work for the BBC around ABR streaming, so the introduction of Dash into the BBC's portfolio. We've worked on low latency streaming. We're continuing to explore that. We've helped the BBC build some of its own CDN capability so that we understand how we want to work in a multi-CDN world. And obviously we've contributed heavily to the HBTV and DVB standards. So it's interesting when I look back over our work plan, just how much the teams moved from being a very traditional broadcast, BBC's picture quality experts, to taking many of those principles and trying to apply them to the IP world. So much in the same way Peter was saying, we have a vision of a smart TV in the end where, the viewer, if they disconnect the aerial dish, they're completely unaware that's gone. The world is just TV carries on in exactly the way it has before. And we move into a world of personalized services. So it's not just personalized content, but very much a one-to-one relationship with the viewer. And we're doing that with features like our Start Again feature, where we very easily transfer the viewer from a broadcast to an IP experience. So that whole seamless combination of IP and broadcast and taking that forward and eventually taking the viewers into a world which is all IP is very much our vision. In terms of the question about when do we see the Olympics and the World Cup, so we've streamed at least 2 World Cups now in UHD on an experimental basis. My answer, which I'd already written down, was if we take the current HD formats as our point of measurement that we want to switch over, from the predictions and the work that we've seen, we think it's about 6 to 10 years before the capability is there. That's very different from the actual switchover point, but we think within 6 to 10 years, the capacity would be there in at least the UK internet to be able to stream events of this magnitude. But we have to remember the actual services people want to develop are changing all the time. So, it is not 6 to 10 years before we could do the whole of the World Cup, say, in UHD, or the Olympics in UHD to UK. So there's always that dependency about what service you're considering when you're answering that question.
But you think that if you turned off terrestrial signals and satellite within 6 to 10 years and you had the World Cup to deliver, you'd be quite comfortable with that in terms of the quality of experience? And
yes, I think the capability will be there. That's a very different thing from when you actually do the switch over. But the technologies and the growth and the investment would have given us an internet somewhere around that period. I'm going for the 6 years probably because I think we've seen acceleration through other players coming to the UK market and delivering a greater capacity into the UK internet. I'm expecting that some of the behaviours that come out of COVID-19 will continue, and that will continue investment in networks. Equally, a more, probably before the COVID crisis, I'd probably say something like a 10-year cycle before we get there.
Okay. Well, at IBC last year, Peter, you had a very interesting demonstration on the DVB stand, and it was your kind of ecosystem for what you saw as the transition to all streaming, and it was very much based around a standardized solution for sort of, interoperable functions that are currently end-to-end. I mean, with regards to standardizing streaming, I mean, with sort of DVB-T and S2, etc., you kind of made a market, you created a market for digital TV that didn't exist. With streaming, the market is very much there already and it's functioning, however imperfect. So why do we need sort of a big push for standardization from DVB right now?
So it's a very good question. Indeed, as you pointed out, we used to operate in a world where people came together with individual building blocks and built together entire systems called DVB-T2 or S2 or whatever. And they then led to the digital transition that is now over, essentially, at least for the large developed markets, it's certainly over. But if you pare back the individual elements, what it was about doing was about defining standardized interfaces and individual black box, which you could sort of connect together. And that's pretty much what we're doing in the DVB-I space. So I agree that streaming's been around for a while, but again, in the digital television space, there was a lot of digital television systems about already when the DVB produced its very first specifications. But what these were was single vendor approaches. And while that's fine, it's costly and it's relatively inflexible in terms of vendor lock-in. So what we've endeavored to do in the DVB project is to say our core vision is a multi-vendor standardized interfaced approach. And that's what it's about. It's about taking gentle paces, it has to be said, because the DVB project is not renowned for its work in streaming just yet. We've done a lot of building blocks, and a lot of these are being used, but the whole ecosystem, certainly no. So it's been about taking gentle paces, starting off with live, making sure that whatever we do for live is applicable to on demand, and then focusing on how we might show off a multi-vendor approach by standardizing the interfaces so that people can come along with different blocks, stick them together, and by and large, they work. And that IBC demonstration was all about showing how you could see other systems that did the same thing around IBC, but at no time could you have seen it with all the different vendors involved. And that provides security in terms of implementability. It provides economies of scale in terms of applying your expertise to the bits you know. And it also ensures that the consumer, when he goes out to buy a product, is buying a product that he knows will last way into the future. So yeah, that's what it's about. It's not about revolutionizing and doing something better than everybody else. It's about taking the state of the art that's out there, sticking it together, and making sure that it's cost effective and particularly interoperable.
Yeah, and that's the key. I was just going to say before you said that word, that's the key word, is interoperability. It's not about telling people this is the best way to do things. It's about saying, here's a framework for how to do it. And we want to make sure that all of the ways to connect to that framework are open enough so that anybody can do so. It doesn't exclude anybody, and it allows vendors, like you said, new vendors to come to market to say, oh, I can go and sell my service or my box or my whatever into this ecosystem because it complies with that framework. And no one has to worry about, oh, is that beta or VHS? Is that a Sony proprietary plug or somebody else's plug? It's just everything fits together. And at the SVA we try to do the same thing. Our biggest mantra is interoperability. It's just, we're not trying to tell people the best way to do things. It's more just, this is a way to do things that allows everybody to connect together.
So Jason, is that idea, are you pushing against an open door when it comes to the vendor community? I mean, does anyone fight back against the idea of interoperability?
No, so that's the funny thing. So that's the kind of uniqueness of the SVA is we actually have a very rich vendor ecosystem. We have competitors come to the table, to do our work. So for example, we put out a forensic watermarking document last year where it was 5 of the biggest watermarking vendors. It was Friend MTS, it was Verimatrix, it was Nagra. They all came and sat at the table and said, okay, let's figure out a way to talk about watermarking that content owners and distributors can utilize that's not vendor specific. Because the issue is the vendors come to the table, and then at the table as well are platform operators and content owners, and a vendor will hey, my solution's the best, this is the way we should do it. And the network operator across the table goes, yeah, your solution's really cool, but it doesn't work on my network. I tried it, sorry. And so now we have to figure out a way with everybody at the table to do it in a way, again, that's interoperable so that everyone can use it. And that's the benefits of organizations like ours and DVB and SMPTE and ITF and all those folks, is they bring everybody together who has an opinion, and then everybody can collectively look at all the opinions and figure out what's the best way to work for the majority of the market.
Okay, and Phil, what do you, the BBC, think of DVBI, for example, as a service discovery sort of standardization? And you mentioned you've already worked on the multicast ABR with the DVB. I mean, what's your view on sort of increased standardization?
So the BBC has a long history of supporting open standards. My travel bill for my team is quite extensive, as they travel around the world to many standards bodies, trying to help create interoperability. One thing I would say when you talk about interoperability, though, is it means nothing without testing. So just having the standards on their own is not sufficient. You have to have sufficient testing regimes to actually ensure that interoperability actually delivers. And of course, in the UK, we've done lots of work around also the consumer brands that people need to understand to buy these, to understand how their services are going to work. There's quite a complex world in terms of moving people from watching television over broadcast into IP. So I think it's more complicated than just having the right open standards. you certainly need a testing process which is understood, delivers robust results, and you need a way of informing and educating the viewers how to make that transition. So within that, we've supported DVBI. My team have contributed quite a lot of the free view play specs we worked on where appropriate. So we've added those into the DVI specification. There are some parts where DVBI is possibly ahead of what we need at the moment. Our focus currently is very much on hybrid devices. The smart TV is very much a device of choice by the viewers. So solutions for the smart TV market were quite important for us, that whole hybrid experience. So we possibly had a slightly different focus in that area. Clearly, we helped run one of the multicast ABR groups in DVB. We're still very interested in multicast ABR, but understanding how that fits in to the more horizontal markets where we don't own a network is quite an interesting question. So for us, multicast ABR has a interesting future ahead. We're not quite sure which way it's going to go yet. And low latency streaming, again, is another thing we've worked on. From all our feedback that we've had, I see many of the audience responses to our UHD trials, for example, and latency is one of the biggest issues that's brought up. So that absolutely is an issue for us that we're trying to solve, and we need to do that in a clearly interoperable way. We need open standards that allow us to, from our head end through the network provision, through the CDNs to the end device, deliver a good low latency experience.
Okay, well, we'll talk about low latency in a moment. And Martin, before that, I mean, give us, from your user experience point of view, and you talk to service providers all the time about, making services look great. What is the message on latency, for example, and how big a deal is it? If you're helping a service provider do their multi-screen service and they've got broadcast as well, we hear that I assume 3 seconds is adequate. That was what Peter was showing last year at IBC. What kind of latency can you have between the broadcast signal and the stream signal? So
even there, we see interesting things. It depends on, of course, the content. That's number one. If you have sports content and you want to have like extremely low latency. But there's another thing that we see that now comes to play is low latency when you watch together. So if you do something together, you also don't want to have a delay of 3 or 4 seconds that you talk together. So what we just launched last week was for the public broadcaster in the Netherlands, also during the COVID-19 period. We developed a feature that's watch together, so that we are not preventing the latency, but we're syncing the signals. So that's another way of preventing, at least, that you don't need low latency, but especially in operator space, low latency is extremely important. So if an operator goes OTT, they want to have low latency because they are compared with others. So we see that there's a lot of interest in doing it, but the standards are still not fully, there are too many variations to implement the standard. So I can give you another example of a few years back. That was when everyone wanted to go on 4K. We said, like, we can do it because the TV supports it, but then we found out that the standards on 4K are not so standard in terms of the handling of DRM, the handling of 4K streams, the difference between H.264 and H.265 and how that worked in the television. We needed to explain a lot to our clients on a technical side that they frankly didn't care. They just want to say, I can broadcast for 4K. And that's now what you see with low latency as well. They only ask, like, what is the latency, right? And in this case, and I think Phil already told it, it's not only the head end, it's also the network, it's the CDN. So there are so many components that influence the latency that for us, it's really hard that we get a lot of questions on our plate that maybe we cannot answer because it's outside of our environment. And that is something that a lot of companies and providers need to work together in order to provide low latency. You really need to work together, and then standards come into play. If you have standards, it's really easy to say, like, if you adhere to the standards, at least you know what to expect. And for us, standards are extremely important because if there are standards, for us it's better and easier to implement. And that goes even with HLS, which is a standard that Apple adheres, and they have a really good standard. But as soon as Samsung implements it in their television, they might implement half of the stack. that some of the things will not work as expected in a television, which makes it us hard that we need to say like, okay, you adhere to the standard, but this part is not implemented. So for us, there's a lot of education needed, and also make sure that everyone adheres to that. So we are doing a lot of educational work, and it's not only doing some plumbing and making an app, because in the end, everybody watches to what Netflix is doing and say like, but Netflix has this, but maybe Netflix has access to other things than you will have as a provider. So it's good to collectively work on standards in order to make sure that application will work across platform.
Okay,
Yeah.
Phil, you've announced a together solution, didn't you? A trial, at least during the lockdown, where people can sync and watch things together. And I presume that that's a different issue, is it, to the sort of the live latency? Obviously, I guess it's just a synchronization, presumably a lot easier.
Yes, actually, it's come from a different team. We've launched a BBC Together on Taster. It actually came out of some thinking that my team did a few years ago when we were working on the HBO TV media sync problem, and as an idea that didn't actually go anywhere at the time. And the team member who invented it moved on to a different team, and I was really pleased to see that he kept the idea alive, and come the current pandemic, he was able to take that onto our BBC Taster platform and demonstrate, yes, the ability to watch a piece of IP content in a synchronized manner, so that you can all use other means to actually exchange and talk about that program as if you were watching it in the same room. I think it's a great innovation, and I was really pleased to see that they've managed to take that forward.
And still, Phil, I mean, in terms of the live streaming, the delay behind broadcast, what is realistic? What would you like to see? And where are you right now in terms of what you can do?
So our broadcast delays for HD are about 5 seconds. At the moment, our IP streams are a long way behind that, and we want to beat our HD broadcast. You know, we want to get down to the sorts of rates that social media supports. You know, we really want to align the various ways that people communicate. So we want to bring our streaming delays down to 2 or 3 seconds. We've demonstrated at IBC a full sort of CMAF chain. I remember it was 2 IBCs ago, I think now, but my team did a sort of a lens to screen demonstration. We also have to, when we think about latency, it isn't just the actual segmented media delivery formats. The problem, we have to look at our own technical architectures. We know if we look at our own latency budget, probably a lot of the latency, probably around half, is actually within the technical processes that are involved in getting the content out to our origin. So there's lots of optimizations that we can do around there in terms of how we actually encode, package, and deliver to our origin to actually reduce the delays. And then we need to look at the actual segmented format itself. So we've again contributed to MPEG CMAF. We've been part of the process in DVB, and -IF has been part of this in terms of taking the MPEG CMAF work and turning it into a usable profile. We've got to the capability now where we would like to trial this. We need to understand a lot more about how it works in a real world network, because clearly one of the concerns, if you're actually moving to a chunk delivery format, you don't actually damage the capability of ABR to handle the network when it's having a perturbation. You know, we don't want to bring back the buffering. We want the best of both worlds. We want low latency and we want zero buffering, and we need to do more trials to actually understand whether technology is capable of delivering that. But that's something we hope to do quite soon. We have closed trials. We can see how we can extend some of those trials out over real world networks and get a sense of what the performance actually is like in the real world.
Okay, and Jason, just in terms of latency, is there any sort of client issue in terms of the devices? I mean, I read somewhere that connected TV makers have different views on how much buffering they want, and whatever you do in the network, if they insist on having more buffering than someone else, is there anything you can do to overcome that?
Well, so I think what people don't understand about buffering is what the buffer is for, right? So the buffer is to make sure that the viewer can keep watching in the event of a network disconnection. And so that's totally different. Like, there are trade-offs you make in terms of latency and buffering. So if you want ultra low latency, so you in standard segmented chunked video over IP, so maybe not using something like WebRTC, but using, you know, TCP to deliver your chunks, you know, you're going to make a trade-off. If you say, I want ultra low latency, then your chunk sizes are super small. And so your buffer is not very big, because your player is just consuming those chunks almost upon, you know, receipt. And then you say like, well, wait a minute, what if, you know, what if the network gets disconnected? So then, how about we make the chunks a little bit bigger and we fill the buffer up some? So we got a 30-second buffer so that if the network disconnects or the ABR has to switch, the viewer keeps watching, but then the problem becomes one of latency. Now I'm 30 seconds behind. So that's the issue, is that we have to there are considerations to make with any so latency, like what we were saying, Phil said it, Peter said it, Martin said it, it's, there are so many components from glass to glass that impact latency. Everything from your encoder, your packager, it's the balance of your servers, right? So is your memory balanced? Is your disk balanced? What's the IO throughput and performance of the boxes that are delivering? There's so many considerations, including the player. So, and then the player is also subject to things that you can't control, like how many apps does the person have open? What's the memory utilization on their computer? What's their what's their downlink speed? What's the issue at the head end? Is there a problem with the DSLAM? So there's all sorts of network components. So when it comes to the player and the buffer, it's really just one small piece of the bigger problem, but there are trade-offs that content owners are making because of latency. So they'll choose to have a smaller chunk size or a larger chunk size, or fill the buffer or not fill the buffer, depending upon how they want that viewer experience to play out.
Okay, and in terms of, Peter, for multicast ABR, I mean, Phil said they're not quite sure which way that will go, but I assumed it was a given that multicast ABR will probably be used for all sort of linear live streaming at some point, and is that correct? I mean, how widespread will that become? Can we achieve this kind of 6 to 10 year time frame without MABR being everywhere?
So, I mean, one of your issues with multicast, of course, the fact is that for it to be optimal, it needs to be deployed through the network. And of course, we know that in many cases, this just doesn't happen. So the multicast ABR exercise is very much around providing an option. Should it be available to switch it on, and the performance improvement when it is switched on for live content is I mean, it's there. The issue will be making sure that it's implementable and that it's available. So it will remain the option. Of course, it's an attractive proposition for everybody, but the incentives need to be there to ensure that it's possible in networks. That's the big issue, is incentivizing it.
Okay,
and
I just want
is the fact that the viewer experience is potentially degrade if you don't implement it. Is that incentive enough?
Okay. All right. Now, just one. Sorry, go Phil.
Yes.
Sorry, Phil, do you want to add first?
Sorry, I think you also have to take into account what the type of service we think viewers will be consuming in the future. A simple linear experience, if you're just using multicast to replace broadcast, that probably isn't going to be the type of service that we want to create in the future. So I think that there are technical challenges around multicast ABR and where you terminate the endpoint and how it passes through the home router, that type of thing. But there are also service demand. We can't give what type of service do we want to create? And one of my colleagues talks about, we just don't want to take out the tuner from a device and add a multicast front end. We need a much more seamless integration in terms of linear and on-demand experiences, and how multicast fits into that is still something that we're certainly thinking about very hard in the BBC.
Okay, Jason, did you want to say something? Just 30 seconds.
Yeah, I was just going to add, we did a multicast ABR tech brief and we looked at the market and the technology, and I mean, the technology it's awesome, right? So it's obviously great for, content backhaul and congestion in the operator network. But the issue becomes over the internet, right? You can't deploy multicast ABR over the internet right now. It just doesn't work. And so that's the issue, is it really is only applicable to a use case where an operator is delivering content to their subs. It's an ISP that has those connections. They have control of the network all the way down to the last mile. So the idea is you deliver multicast all the way to the residential gateway, and then you turn it back into unicast. So I think that's probably at some point going to happen, but the ecosystem is the issue, right? So the end device vendors don't want to implement multicast capable software on their devices until there's enough operators employing it, and the operators don't want to spend the money to deploy it until there's enough of an ecosystem. So it's like, but it is really, I mean, the DVB spec, I mean, it's great stuff. We got to figure out a way to make that, to make that work for the right use cases.
Okay, well, the last question then, just because of time, it's going to be a quick fire round, so about 30 seconds each, if you would. But it's in terms of how we will actually see services and how they're presented to us when we do get to the all streaming world. Will we have, you know, program guides? Will there be channel up, down? Will it all be through apps? Or we get into an app and then we're given some other sort of choice? I mean, let's just start with Martin, and then we'll go round to Jason after that.
So we're enter a full app world. I think what I see here is, for us, we see that discoverability will be different. There will be different applications. There will be aggregation as well by different companies. So that will be the platform, like Roku is already doing the aggregation. Apple TV is doing the aggregation. So those will be players where you will be browsing in, but we will also see different things. So I think one of the things that we saw in this COVID-19 period is we have a service called Broadway HD. They have Broadway shows. They had a show, and discoverability was through Instagram. Hugh Jackman did, let's watch this show all together at 7 o'clock. And we had a lot of people join at the same time. It was not a live thing, so it was just a pre-recorded show, but everybody started to watch at the same time. And that was instigated by Instagram. And on that side, I think what we will see is there will be, of course, sports, there will be live events, but a lot of the content is not necessary to be broadcasted at the moment, so that's not real life. So I think that near life experience or fake life will take another flight, and that means more congestion on the network and different problems, maybe for a different panel. But I think that's something that we will see. So discoverability will be in different applications, and there will be aggregation on different in different angles. So let's see what happens. My 30 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yeah, okay. Now, Jason, what's your view on it?
Yeah, no, I think EPGs will be around in some form or another. I think that's how people right now are used to finding content. Now, with that said, there's going to be different ways to fill the EPG. So look at what HBO Max has done. They've implemented a sort of human curation model where they're not only using algorithms to recommend content based on what people have watched and what other people have watched, but they're also doing some human curation of content. So I think the EPG will probably evolve. It'll evolve into kind of what Martin was talking about, different ways to find content through different channels, whether it's social channels or, you know, recommendation channels or things like that. But it's, you know, the people want a simple way to find content, and they want to be able to, quote unquote, move up and down channels. I had a friend ask me that. He was like watching Hulu, and he's like, why can't I just jump back to what I was watching before? It's like, yeah, there's no up and down channel. Sorry. So it's going to be interesting. I think that's a very big area where we're going to see a lot of innovation and development over the coming years.
Okay, well, Peter, you go next. I know this is one of the areas that you're approaching with DVBI.
Yeah, so indeed, in Europe, it's a particularly thorny issue because of the regulatory environment where live TV is highly regulated, but the stuff you see on the internet is not. So so that's one of the areas where we place a series of mechanisms in DVBI to allow you to populate a content guide. Exactly how that's done is something we're discussing at the moment, but it could be a problem that's so local that we can't solve it. We'll have to see. Will the EPG exist? Yes, I very much subscribe to the view that it will depend very much on what type of content you're watching, but it will be key because it's the way in which the consumer will access content. So getting it right will be quite important.
Okay, and Phil, wrap us up with your view on how we find services in future. If it were in an all IP streaming world, this is.
So I think it depends upon the type of platform. I think for traditional televisions, there's a long history of people using the EPG as their discovery mechanism. There are prominent advantages that Peter's referred to. And I think if we're going to transition people into an IP world, we've got to give them user interfaces they're used to. So I think in a smart TV world, traditional TV world, the EPG will be with us for some time. It's going to evolve, it's going to change considerably. But as the key discovery mechanism, I think it's with us for some considerable time. I think another platform such as 5G, where viewers are already sort of an app-based world, I think it's very different. I find it hard to envisage an EPG in a 5G world. I think that's going to be a difficult thing to introduce to people. And I think the way the EPG evolves, how we create that seamless mix of live channels that come and go. I think the concept of being a fixed number of live channels is gone. We're in a much more reactive world, and how we blend that in with our on-demand offering is going to be a critical part.
Okay, great stuff. All right, well, let's finish it there. So thank you all very much for your time today. I think it's a very interesting discussion. I hope everyone else did, and great to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.